Thank you so much for joining me. I'm Nola Simon. I'm the host of the Hybrid Remote Center of Excellence. And today we've got a West Coast perspective happening. Amanda Lewis is an editor and soon to be author of the book called Tracking Giants. And she's joining me today from, what did you say, Gabriola Island?
Gabriola.
Gabriola.
Yeah, close. There's another island
Explain
here
to us
called
where that is.
Galliano.
Because
It's
I
between,
needed a refresher on my West Coast geography. So
yeah, for sure. So it's one of the Gulf Islands, and it's between Vancouver on the mainland of BC and Vancouver Island.
ferries are a reality in your life.
Ferries are a major reality, yeah, and it's a constant rush to get the next ferry or to avoid the lunchtime break in the ferry schedule. Yeah, it's no problem unless you go out in the evening and then you're stuck. So we don't go anywhere.
You don't go anywhere.
Yeah.
That's an interesting concept. But that's actually the foundation of your book is you found adventure in your own backyard, right?
Yeah, so the book is Tracking Giants. It comes out May 30th, and it's about my search for BC, so British Columbia's largest trees, which are called champion trees. They're the largest of their species, so like the biggest Douglas fir, the biggest Western red cedar. And the idea of the project was that it would help me expand my view beyond just Vancouver, where I was living at the time, and that I could go travel around this province, which is huge. It's a huge place and has very varied geography. And that was a huge adventure because it is a challenge to find these trees. It's a challenge to go into these remote environments. And then with the pandemic, I had to shrink the scale of the project and focus on the trees in my backyard and just around in my neighborhood.
So you do this as a group. Did somebody train you or teach you how to do this, or did you go out
No,
in the forest
not
by
at
yourself?
all. I just leapt in. I started doing it the day after my friend suggested the idea to visit all these champion trees. And I started looking for these trees. They are kept on a list by the BC Big Tree Registry, which is housed at the University of British Columbia, Faculty of Forestry. And I thought, oh, I can find these trees. There's some in Stanley Park, which is like the jewel of Vancouver, at that big park like Central Park. And there were some champions there. And I thought, oh, it's going to be all this easy. It's going to be as easy as a walk in the park, basically. But I didn't have any training in looking for trees or being in the outdoors. And as soon as I ventured beyond Vancouver, that became pretty apparent because they're found by forestry companies and mountaineers, and for good reason, because they're way out there.
So forestry, they have a mandate to actually identify them and catalog them then?
Oh, this is a huge question, Nola.
Yes.
Yeah, the forestry companies some of them have taken more of an interest in cataloging these big trees, but for a long time, forestry in BC, when they thought of big trees, they think of something to cut down. And now forestry companies are really realizing the multiple values of big trees.
Yeah, I noticed Amanda had sent me a list earlier on, and the number of champions has actually increased.
Yeah,
And I thought that was actually probably a positive trend to highlight.
definitely. Yeah. So when I started the project, there were 43 champions in BC, and there are now, I'd have to check again, but probably about 54. And the reason for that is more people are knowing about this registry for big trees, and they're sending in nominations because they're looking around. And I think that's a positive side of it is forestry companies are working with the registry in some cases to say, we found this big tree and we'd like to save it. Here's where it is. And then just landowners seeing that big tree in their backyard and nominating it. And it's a really positive development.
Yeah, no, I think that everything that I know about BC forests is they're magical. They're magical places.
Yeah, it has been a wonderful project to just get out into the woods, like as a research place, like a place to research. It's been a great way to start off my book.
Okay. But
Mhm.
it developed into more than that, right? Because now it's not just the story of searching for these trees.
Yeah.
It's become a memoir.
Yeah. So it became pretty quickly about because I was immediately faced with my own limitations as a tree hunter or tree tracker. I realized that the book and the project itself would be so much about failure
Mm.
and about failing in public. And that is something that I generally try not to do, is failing. But I'm an editor, and editors are really tasked with getting it right. Like, we're trained to spot errors. and to look for errors of logic and to make the argument as sound as possible. So it's very easy for me to just point out all the ways I was failing with the project. And eventually the project shifted because I started with gusto, like rushed into the project, was blogging about all my early successes because it was easy to find these trees at the beginning. They were in the park. And then when I started finding that it was difficult to find these trees, because it's really like finding a needle in a haystack, right? Like finding a tree in a forest, I stopped blogging. And so a few friends said, "Are you just not doing your project anymore because you stopped writing about these trees?" I was like, "No, I'm out there. I'm out there every weekend and like multiple attempts." And they said, "That's actually interesting to know just that you're failing, that you're going out there and trying to find these trees." And so then that was when I realized, oh, okay, this project isn't actually about finding all the champion trees. It's just about being in the forest and easing up on myself, and how I have a history. This is where the memoir part came in, of taking on these huge projects and huge goals and being like overly ambitious. And I realized that the trees aren't like that. Like the trees are just growing for their own sake. They're not growing for anyone. They don't care if I visit them. They're just there, or in some cases, not there. And that's when the project shifted.
So the forest is really a metaphor about your life.
In some ways, yeah, because also the idea of champions positions them as growing alone, like they're the biggest and they tower over everything, and they're mighty just by virtue of being themselves. And that's really not how forests work, right? They're so interconnected, and those big trees are able to grow big because of the forest around them. And that's what I realized in my own life, is that I tend to be pretty solitary, doing a lot of like solo striving, like going on long pilgrimages or long hikes on my own, and not joining the sports teams. Like group projects are always a horror show for me. And then I realized that looking for trees was a lot easier when I let people in and made friends with people who actually know what they're doing, and then like forest techs, and then we could have a great day in the woods, and it didn't matter what we found there.
That's really cool. And actually, one of the stories that I actually wanted to tell on this podcast was actually how Amanda and I met. So I work with a coach called Kerri Twigg, and so did Amanda. But Amanda also published Kerri's book. And in addition, she also published the book of Leslie Ehm, who is a recent podcast guest as well, too. So Amanda and I became aware of each other because of Kerri. And then we both joined meditation classes that Kerri was offering, and that's how we met Susan. So right at the moment, I've got this interwoven network. At one point, I want to produce like this graphic of how all
Yeah,
the guests are actually
love that.
connected. And so for me, you're talking about the forest, and I'm like, cool, this is essentially similar to how I network. I think that's fascinating as well, too. And obviously they're connected, but the question is really, you're an editor. How is it different being on the other side, to be a
Ooh,
creator and be an author?
it was a big challenge initially, because I know a lot about editing, and I started writing this book and I was making all the mistakes that first time authors make, but I wasn't really aware I was doing it until much later, reflecting. And I thought, oh, it's so silly. Even though I know so much about editing, I was just getting myself in such a tangle. So not really knowing what I was going to write about before I wrote it. And that was because I was living the project as I was writing it, which is tricky, writing about your life as you're living it. Memoirs are reflections usually when you've had a few years to think about it, but to reflect as you're doing it is hard. But what I really realized that shifted the scale of the project as it relates to writing and editing is writers often start their project and they know exactly how the book is going to end, and then they're a bit horrified when the project starts to change because they've mapped it out, and shouldn't it follow the outline. And I'm very much of the belief that writing ebbs and flows. So you write, and then that gives you more information and changes what you wrote, and you're constantly, it's like this feedback loop. So you shouldn't be so tied to the outcome or the outline. You should allow it to change. But of course, I gave myself an outline of 43 trees in 1 year. And when I didn't achieve that, I was like, all hope is lost. Like I shouldn't finish this project at all. And then I realized it's actually about the creative process. It's not so much about learning to be an adventurer or learning about trees. It's about living the creative process, which roughly looks like I get an idea, I'm super excited about it, I rush into doing it, I realize it's harder than it looks. I panic and maybe quit or hopefully push on through and change the project into something that's doable and maybe not as exciting as the original, but like even more exciting because it's possible.
Yeah, no, exactly. And it took you,
Yeah.
what, 4 years to really
Yeah. It took 4 years.
get to this point, right?
Definitely, yeah. And it was complicated because I had a very busy day job and I was using my weekends to find trees, which is ideally the time that you'd be writing the book. So if I was looking for trees, I wasn't writing. And so it doubled the length of the whole project. And I didn't know that going into it. I didn't count on that. I just
Mm,
assumed I could slot it in
yeah,
everything else. And that's the hallmark of the overly ambitious person.
yeah, no,
Yeah.
exactly. And Kerri writes a lot about practices, and we know this because she does the yoga, and you're also into yoga too, right?
Yeah.
And obviously meditation that we did together. What practices did you really find help you sustain through that 4 years and that creative process?
Yeah, I think the practices of looking, and we know this is one of the practices that we learned with Kerri is it see in, but that Shinzen Young practice of just noticing things in the environment. And that's how I became excited again about trees because for a while I started to really hate them because they just represented, I know it's like I'm a monster hating trees. It's like hating babies or kittens, right? But they just represented all my failures and how I wasn't able to do this thing. And then when I started to actually notice them, notice their bark, notice their leaves, I was like, wow, these are amazing. And they're actually telling me what they are and how they grow if I just look. So that became a practice of just looking and asking questions. And that is something that, again, I do as an editor. I look and I ask questions. I'm not, as an editor, generally you start out looking for errors and then you move into a space where errors are allowed because you're just trying to get to a new truth with the writer. So you ask lots of questions, you put yourself in that seat of like devil's advocate. What if you did this or what if you did that? And that became a more fruitful place and more fruitful practice for learning about trees.
Oh, cool. That's interesting.
Mhm.
How they're there's similar skills employed in different ways, right? So
Yeah,
it's that creativity and really innovation of how you take practices in one area of life and work and apply it to something else. That just blows things up and just creates this whole new field of opportunity.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. So when you're talking, I'm like, okay, could technology have helped this? Did you ever break out the
Totally.
drone?
Oh my God, technology would have been my friend entirely. The book opens with me spinning in circles, like literally spinning in circles, trying to find a tree. And my boyfriend at the time, he was with me and he is an AI guy, like
Oh,
technology is his thing.
yeah.
And so I just handed him the GPS and like he figured out where the tree was using the tool. I was just relying on like an old map and like handwritten instructions and couldn't find it. And if I'd learned more about the tools, I probably would have had more success early on. But I had such a reluctance. I just wanted to go and experience the forest. But definitely like the most successful big or successful quote unquote big tree trackers, like people who have the best success rate of finding big trees. They look at Google Earth for old growth forests and find patches and they can see where that might be a big tree that's poking up.
I see. Sorry.
LiDAR
Patches of what?
of old growth forest.
Okay.
So the trees that are the oldest, and
Yeah.
there's very few patches of old growth left in BC.
Right.
Excuse me, but that's where the biggest trees would probably be. They can see where a tree is poking up above the rest of the canopy, and they're
Right.
like, "Oh, that's a very tall tree. I wonder if it's also very large around, like if its diameter is very big." And then they go in and they ground truth that idea. So ground truth is basically like on the boots verification of a hunch,
Right.
essentially. Yeah. And then LiDAR is another way of looking for big trees. So LiDAR is like laser points, basically like to see you can send LiDAR over an area and then it gives you measurements based on where the lights bounce off.
Yeah.
I don't understand it very well, but that's another tool that is very effective. Yeah, so technology could have really helped, but I'm a bit old school. And now I go out with people who use the tools and I avail of them, but they're just not of interest to me. I'm just not I don't like living totally in tech land.
So, and that's the thing, it really comes down to worldview and perspective, right? For
Yeah.
you, it's more about the journey and the effort that it really takes to find it. It's not necessarily the absolute achievement to find it and be the first.
Yeah, I have no real interest in finding trees. Like I'm going where other people have gone before. Yeah.
And you find magic around the way.
Yeah, exactly. Or like measuring trees. Like that is a
Mm.
big part of being a big tree tracker, but I'm not great at math. I'm getting better. I'm taking it on as a personal challenge, but like I failed math in high school and I've had a real phobia about math ever since. And so for a long time, I was pretty reluctant to measure in case I got it wrong again, because I've been proven to have gotten it wrong, failed. But I just asked people, like, how do you measure the height of a tree? And can you
Right.
show me exactly how to measure circumference? And there's a formula like anything else. I'm like, oh, it's like baking muffins, right? There's a way to do it where you can increase your chances of success. It's not some hidden art. Like it's pretty easy
So this
when
is
you
your version of ground truth.
this is
You're not
well
learning it. You're not learning it in a classroom. You're learning it on the ground and being
it
shown.
needs to be, yeah, it needs to be applied for me because I'm like pretty tactical. And I was saying this to someone recently. I want to learn more about math, but that doesn't mean that I need to take advanced calculus. I'm more like I want to take a woodworking course so I can apply measurements to things I can hold.
Yeah.
And that makes sense in my life. Or like math is so much more of my life now that I'm like running my business in a different way. And you're just constantly thinking about numbers. So it can't help but you have to be good at math in
Right.
that way.
Majored in math. And that's where it's like, I read the description that you sent me and I'm like, okay, we're different people. She failed math. I majored in math. And
Yeah.
then recently she posted this giant picture of what kind of ant was it? Some kind of
Oh,
giant anthill.
a thatch ant. Yeah, they make
Yes.
these big ant hills. They're
Yeah.
amazing.
And she's totally fascinated by it. And I'm just like, yeah, I'll be ready to go. I like camping. I like being outdoors as well too, but
Yeah.
there's different dimensions of this.
Oh yeah, I know. And I went closer and I was like, look at the move. Like it's so cool.
Yeah. And I go to Amanda's Instagram to look at the pictures and just have an entry point into this world to imagine what's possible. And
Yeah.
that's actually what I find fascinating. One of the first times that Amanda and I actually interacted professionally, somebody had given me this idea to write a book about hybrid remote. And being the only editor that I know, Amanda was kind enough to talk to me and told me no, I didn't have enough and I should really rethink my proposition. But what she helped me do was imagine the world in which a book that I would write would exist. And
Yes,
could you talk to us about world building and how important that is
for sure.
in all
Yeah.
aspects of life and work?
Oh my God, such a huge topic. Think about it in terms of when you say world building, I think of like science fiction and how that's so you're really building worlds. But in terms of a book, I think of books in terms of a whole ecosystem. So I call it a publishing ecosystem. And in an ecosystem, everything needs to be supporting each other and working in balance. And even the thatch ants are part of the ecosystem. They're there for a reason. And your book, it can't just live on its own. It has to live as part of your other service offerings. So if it wouldn't make sense for me to write a book about tennis. First, I don't play tennis, but let's say I just got interested in tennis and wrote a book. Um, I have no one knows, no one connects me in tennis. Who would I sell it to? Am I selling it to tennis players or to historians of sports? It is such a weird prospect for me. But if I wrote a book about writing, like that would make sense. That would live with my other service offerings of writing coaching and editing and publishing strategy. And so your book has to be obvious to the people who are already interested in you. And then your talk on writing would feed that book on writing. So for you, like writing a book about hybrid and remote makes total sense, but then you're still like learning about the space and establishing yourself. That's so new and exciting.
Right.
That putting a book out there is almost like cart before the horse, but it's still part of the ecosystem. It's just growing. It's like the sapling versus the big tree.
Yeah. And that's also what you told me too. I remember is like, it takes what, 18 months, at least 2 years to actually publish.
Yeah.
Really, you have to consider what the topic of conversation is going to be relevant like 2 years in the future
Yeah,
do you even know that? And I was like, okay, now I see where we're going, because
exactly.
it's how do you, it's like that forecasting, like you have an idea of what the future could be. How do you lay the
Yeah,
ground to actually get there? And that
this
made
is
total
it.
sense. Yeah.
Yeah, because publishers, they are kind of fortune tellers in a sense. They're
Mm.
looking ahead generally 2 years to see what might be of interest in 2 years. And something like hybrid and remote, it's so new that we're still all figuring it out. And in 2 years from now, we might all be hybrid. And it's, yeah, obviously, but then the book would need to reflect that, or better for the idea, if it's so new, is to do an article, because
Yeah.
a magazine article could come out in a few months as opposed to a year. So editors are notorious for this. They read a book and they're like, oh, it should have been an article. Like, and it's not to knock the author, but it's more about the timeliness of the subject or the strength of the idea. It
Right.
could sustain itself over a book, or it could just be an article.
Yeah. Or is the idea evergreen? And like, how do you find the
Yeah.
evergreen idea that's going to stand the test of time? And I haven't gotten there yet.
But, or like maybe hybrid is one part of a whole book about ways of working.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's an excellent segue. You're really good at this. I love this. Because
Yeah.
the segue is going to be about the ecosystem, the fact that Amanda lives where she lives now, but she hasn't always lived there, because you've worked
Mhm.
in Toronto. Did you work in New York?
Nope, but
Okay.
Toronto, Vancouver. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. And so now she lives on this island, but now her client base is international. And
Yeah.
so her work is really all part of an ecosystem. But working remotely fuels the work that you do. And how do you
100%.
supercharge those networks to get clients and do that?
Yeah, it's so funny because when I look back at when I lived in Toronto, so I moved out of Toronto in 2017, I think. And I had a lot of fear about leaving Toronto because it's one of the hubs of publishing.
Mm.
And I felt if I left the city, people wouldn't remember me. They wouldn't know about me. They would think that I was a hack. This is a constant fear of creative people. They'll think I'm a hack. But I was going to Vancouver, like not some backwater. And Vancouver has a very vibrant publishing scene. It just is smaller than Toronto. But I had all these weird hangups about it. And I decided ultimately that being on the West Coast again, it's where I grew up. I was born in Ireland and then grew up on the West Coast, was actually the best thing for me and would make me a happier person. And that could only make my work better. So I left and went to Vancouver. And then I was there for about 4 years. And then the pandemic happened, of course. But for a while, even before the pandemic, I'd been thinking about living on this island, Gabriola. It's where my parents live. So I've been coming here for years. But I had similar hangups, right? Like my mom had been trying to get me to come and live here, but that's every mom's dream, right? And I was like, Mom, I don't want to live on your island. But she was like, no, you'll like it because it has all the things that you enjoy doing. And there's tons of writers and artists, and you can garden, you can go to the beach. And as I said, no, I have to be in the city. No, my clients are here. No. And so just really confining myself again. And cut to, I'm now living here, been here about 2 years, and I rarely leave the house. My boyfriend jokes that I'm an octopus, like lives alone, never leaves home unless needed. As I talked about the ferry, like, why go anywhere? And my clientele has only grown and is international. And I think that's because I had to look beyond. I was like, I'm on this island, I have to make it work. And I can't just go into a city, like go into a city job basically. And I don't really want to. I love walking on the beach, and like moms know, right? Moms, they know what's best sometimes. And like gardening and just being in the forest for no reason other than being in the forest is actually really supportive of my work. It's where I get lots of ideas. I think through client problems when I'm walking on the beach. And I'd find that pretty difficult in the city, I think. I think I was pretty limited. And yeah, and then I've used it as an advantage with the international client base because it's a novelty, right? Like living on an island. And one of my clients who's based in the States recently said that was one of his deciding factors in hiring me is, yeah, I've got the credentials, but so do a lot of editors. But he just thought it was cool. I lived on this
Yeah.
island.
And
Yeah,
it tells a lot about you because it's about the story that you tell yourself. That's really
that's right.
where you had to let go of that narrative that you had to be in the city to be successful. That's a story
Exactly.
that's living in your head.
Yes.
And for you to embrace that and then figure out how you make it work, grounding yourself in it and prioritizing your health and your happiness and your family relationships, people strive for that. And that story is really attractive. So that does not surprise me at all. That's one of the reasons I
Good.
wanted you on the podcast.
Thanks. Yeah. It surprised me, I gotta say. Again, hindsight 2020, all of that. But now when I look at that person who was so scared to leave Toronto, I'm like, oh, you should have just left years ago and gone
No, I
straight to
know.
this island. You know?
Toronto is overrated. Sorry, Toronto people. I
No, I
think
love
2 hours
Toronto.
north of Toronto.
No, Toronto's so good. I'm going to Toronto in a few weeks and I can't wait because I haven't been in a real city in years. And then I'm going to New York. So I'm like ready for that city overload. And
Okay.
yeah, so I need that as well. But I don't want to work, I don't want to have to rely on a city.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A couple of times a year is good. Yeah, it's not like I
Museums,
don't go to Toronto.
galleries. Yeah, no, Toronto is awesome.
Okay, we'll retract the diss. Sorry. I wanted to then ask you about what does your day-to-day look like? Because you post a lot of pictures of bicycling. And so what does your day look like?
Yeah, right now I'm really excited about my compost. My day to day, okay, so like today I got up and then I walked outside with my coffee to listen to the birds because it's springtime and the dawn chorus is starting up and it's so beautiful. And I'm trying to ground myself in that way rather than immediately go to my phone. Like, let's not kid ourselves though. Like, the first thing I did this morning was check Instagram because, like, I love it. It's so good.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a nice little dopamine hit. And then, yeah, I work for a bit. I take a big break in the afternoon because I get really squirrely at my desk. And I usually go out for a few hours and run errands and walk in the woods and garden or do whatever I need to do, see my parents. And yeah, and then I work for a bit after dinner. So my days are long,
Yeah.
but they're broken up into these chunks, which I find works well for me. And I hated like a 9 to 5 in an office, I think, for that reason.
So you're managing your energy basically. So you're working
Yeah,
when it feels optimized for when you do your best work. That's really
totally. Yeah. So I tend to do deep work in the morning and then usually like emails in the afternoon. But what was I going to say about that? Oh, it'll come back to me. Yeah, but I'm thinking about how to shake that up again because I don't want to be working past dinner now. So I'm looking more at my week rather than the day. This is what I was going to say is Pomodoro
Yep.
method is
Yes.
super helpful for me. So like these 25-minute chunks, because on those 5-minute breaks, I get up and do a chore.
Yeah.
And ideally, then by the end of the week, all my chores are done and I can just enjoy the weekend. That's like a big perk of working from home. Yeah. And then thinking about the week is try not to work on Friday afternoons. And I learned this from one of my clients that he generally stops his work week, his client work at lunch on Friday, and then spends that Friday afternoon like sorting out files, following up on invoices, all that stuff that can really fall through the cracks as a business owner. And to me, that feels like a super nourishing practice for yourself and for your business. So you don't go into the weekend like, I haven't done that thing yet. My accountant is chasing me. Yeah.
So when I went to sales, we structured the week. Basically, I did client meetings like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Monday was marketing, so writing and emails like crafting.
Yeah.
And then Friday was follow-up Friday. So marketing
Nice.
Monday and follow-up Friday. And
It's
so
so
I've tried to
good.
stick to this
Yes.
because I found it a lot healthier than the 14-hour days.
Oh yeah, the 14-hour day does not work, I gotta say.
No.
And like I also have to say I don't have kids, so I'm really only responsible for my schedule, and that's why I think this is possible for me, but it doesn't mean that it's the right way for it. And yeah, I love this idea of this structuring your days like marketing Monday. I do meetings usually on Mondays and Wednesdays, and then like chores I also think of wash up Wednesdays. When I do laundry. Yeah,
how do you make it easy for like memory, right? So like
totally. And our brains love to just absorb all the tasks and think I should be doing all these things all at once, which again is like the tree tracking project. Like I should have found all these trees.
right.
Yeah, but if you're like, I'll find that tree on a tree Tuesday.
Yeah, exactly. And that goes
Set.
honestly, you're talking about this and it's like, okay, you've developed equanimity, which
Yeah,
is a whole
trying to.
meditation thing that Kerri has encouraged us to
Yeah.
embrace.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I lose my shit on the regular. And like, I cried twice yesterday before 10. Like, and my
Okay.
boyfriend was like, you might be getting your period. I'm like, maybe.
Oh, that's always a popular conversation. Yeah.
But like maybe. But really just like that we are very fragile creatures, right? Like the slightest thing can upset us. And we're always in response to our environment. Like if it's cloudy out, I get a little sad, or if the hormones are doing one thing and then one week and not this, or if I didn't have enough protein that week, or we're all just so sensitive, or you can tell when your neighbor hasn't slept enough.
That's the ideal benefit of being able to manage like location flexibility, time flexibility.
For sure.
And working for yourself gives you ultimate control over that. And that's where I think a lot of organizations really too could embrace at least part of this. How do you adapt even a portion of this that people feel that they have some choice and some autonomy in how
Yeah.
they balance their work? Right.
I think it's hugely important and needs to be talked about more. And that's why like and talking freely about periods and stuff, because for
Yeah.
many women, like it can really derail your whole week, right?
Yeah.
If you have endometriosis, forget about it. It's so painful. Or I sometimes don't sleep very well and I would just have to call in sick because I'm like, I haven't slept in days.
Yeah.
That is a real thing and that people need to talk about.
Yeah, definitely. And it's not
Mhm.
even just it's as you get older, because I'm going to be 52 this year. I don't even actually know because I have an IUD, but I'm looking at menopause, right? So
Yeah,
I'm going for all this tests to even figure out if I'm even in menopause. And it's like,
exactly.
how do I balance that reality? So it's not affecting
Yeah,
me, but I'm almost planning for it because it's like, I don't actually know what I don't know. And how does that
yeah,
impact my work? And what creates fear in me is all of this talk about brain fog.
yeah,
My brain is my work. And
yeah.
I'm going to be foggier than normal. This is going to be interesting.
Yeah, or it's people who are new parents, right? Like they're
Yeah.
running on very little sleep, very little energy, and I feel like workplaces need to accommodate that as well. Welcome back. I hope you had a good parental leave, but they're still parents. Like they're still taking care of a tiny child. It's not like they've mastered it in 9 months or a year, and that they're totally back to rights. Like postpartum
Speaking
is
of,
real. Yeah,
I did it twice. So yeah, without
yeah.
accommodations.
Yeah, they just need to be.
Yeah.
Or thinking about long COVID, right? So many
Mhm.
people have this brain fog,
Yeah.
and or even if you're living with an invisible disability, right?
Yeah.
And I think that people need to just, if they're comfortable talking about it, but that workplaces need to acknowledge it and know that not everyone is functioning at the same level, and that's not good or bad. It's just like we all have off days, or you can do math faster than I can. So what, basically? Like we would just, if we were working on a team, we would
Yeah.
adapt for that. And I think that workplaces need to adapt for everyone's strengths.
For me, and it's funny because it's mostly on Zoom because you'll see me tilting, right? Because I'm deaf in this year.
Yeah.
Right. So it's on Zoom that I actually see my invisible disability, which isn't really much of a disability, but it becomes visible on Zoom.
Oh,
Right. Because
interesting.
everybody's, you have to keep eye contact. You have to do this and it's okay. But I catch myself
Yeah.
because I'm optimizing what works for me. And that's where it's like, there's a lot of little tiny pieces about inclusion that people don't
Hmm.
talk
Yeah.
about.
Or like when the pandemic started and we were wearing masks, like so many people realized that, myself included, that we're lip breathing
Yeah.
and we don't even know it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's just a metaphor for how workplaces, like everyone is adapting to the workplace in a different way, and we're not even aware of it until that thing is removed, or like
Right.
whatever it might be, or like the fact that we can't all work well on a 9 to 5 structure.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah,
And communication is more complicated than we ever imagined. Right. I think
yeah,
that's really where the learning is. We really need to become more personalized to make sure that everybody is on track for where they need to be personally.
for
And
sure.
that
Yeah,
affects everything in working. So that's, I think, the opportunity that comes out of the pandemic, right?
yeah.
Is can we be more thoughtful and intentional?
Thoughtful and intentional and kind. And
Yeah.
I've come face to face with my own unkindness in the last few months, and I always thought I was a pretty kind person, but I've been watching myself. I'm like, oh, I have a tendency to be mean-spirited in some ways, and I'm just watching that because obviously something is going on, but if I were in the workplace, like that would be playing out with my teams,
Mm,
and everyone goes through these times, right? And so if we can be really intentional about how we're showing up for ourselves and for others and have that part of our everyday work practice, whether it's just for ourselves or as part of the office setting, I think that can be really helpful.
yeah, no, I
Mhm,
agree. I agree.
mhm.
I monitor my competitiveness. That's funny.
Mhm.
Actually, that was one part I actually stopped with the classes for a little bit because I had people who made comments that I was actually doing so well. And it was a compliment,
Yeah,
but it was like, it was it triggered competitiveness. And it's like, this is not why I'm doing this because I know one thing I know about myself is if I'm competing, I'm not actually doing my best because it's a distraction,
that's right.
right?
Yeah.
And I have to let that go. And it's such an easy pathway to go down for me.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's where the big trees can offer you some lessons, right? Because
Yeah.
the only reason we know about these trees is because we've had this idea to basically compete them, to enter them in a competition against each other. And the trees aren't competing. As I said, like the trees are growing for each
Yeah.
other and helping each other. But we have this constant need to compare and compete. And it really only ends up hurting ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. And that's why you shouldn't do Instagram first thing in the morning, people.
No, do Instagram. Do whatever you want. Live your life. Run naked through the woods.
Don't post that on Instagram. Oh, was there anything else that you wanted
Yeah,
to cover that we didn't?
I don't think so. One thing actually I'm thinking about workplaces is just for a long time I thought that there was like one way to live your life and live your career, and that I'd have to play the game, follow these rules in order to get that golden ring. And we know that this isn't true, but just to reinforce that it isn't true. And so many of the practices that I do now, like gardening, like I find that enormously helpful to my career, more so than say going to a conference or being picked for a prestigious publishing fellowship. Like I used to really want to be picked as a fellow. And now I realize it would be helpful, but like also helpful are the things that I'm creating for myself. And I would encourage everyone to look at that. What would be helpful for you? Like maybe it's taking a course on inclusion or communication, or maybe that Tuesday night badminton class is like actually helpful because you're working as a team and seeing what a team can do.
That just triggers my competitiveness, Amanda.
Yeah, competitive
Badminton.
badminton.
One thing I want to leave you with is check out Amanda's Instagram. She has like the best house. Her Zoom background is like this log house. It's always and she changes places. Every time I talk to her, you're somewhere else in the house. So it's always quite exciting to see her backgrounds. And I encourage you to take a look at what she's doing with the project. Read the book, buy the book. It's available for pre-order.
Yeah.
What is it? Is it Greystones? Am I getting that
Yep,
right?
Greystone is the publisher, and it's available May 30th. But yeah, pre-order is a very welcome part of a writer's life. So you can order on Amazon and Indigo and wherever books are sold.
I got to tell you personally that May 30th is the day that my mother actually passed away.
Oh,
And so I love this concept of your book blooming on that day.
oh, that's
And so
very
I'm going to
sweet.
send you, like I did Leslie and Erica with
Oh,
their new venture M2. I'm going to send you my mom's magic because all of these dates are just magical.
thanks,
I didn't even actually connect that until right now. So I got goosebumps. But
no.
so out of what was comes what is and what will be.
Exactly. Yes.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it,
Thank
Amanda.
you. Thank you, Noah.